Every civilized man, regardless of where he's from or where he lives, thinks about the Roman Empire every single day. And after this video, you'll know exactly why. In July of this year, I marched upon the city of Rome. Well, actually, I took the train from Naples, but you get the point. So most people plan their Europe trip to go and have good food, drink good wine, meet fine women, etc. Not that I didn't do any of these, but my true objective was to trace the path of the great general Hannibal Barca as he voyaged into Italy towards Rome. So I better understand what it is about the Eternal City that captures the male psyche so well. I went from the coasts of Iberia, across the French Riviera, through the Alps, into Italy proper, to Naples and then to Rome in order to bring you this story. Most people don't know this, but Rome wasn't always a superpower. There was another superpower across the Mediterranean in Africa. This superpower was called Carthage. Carthage was the enemy of Rome, and their general, Hannibal Barca, was the arch nemesis of the Roman Republic. The thing is, the Romans knew he was coming, and the Romans knew how good an army and a general that he was. So they were warned. They thought that perhaps he would attack from the west, attacking at Massalia from the Iberian Peninsula. Perhaps he would attack from the east. Maybe he would be making allies with the Macedonians in Greece. Perhaps he would attack from the south. Maybe attack directly from Africa, which is his home base. But no, our mad lad takes Italy from the north across the Alps, a feat which is considered impossible, marching his army with elephants across the Alps during the winter. And then he of course lost men during the grueling journey across the Alps. But when he came into Italy, he was taking Rome completely by storm, completely by surprise. Now, Hannibal knew exactly what he was doing. He was a fantastic general, one of the best on the planet across history, across time. So he knew why he did what he did. He had to take Rome by surprise. Rome at this point was a powerful force with a navy and an army strong as his, if not stronger in terms of manpower. But Hannibal was not to be dissuaded. He would take Rome no matter what. He had a job to be done. And in his own words, he would either find a way or he would make one. And as I followed his path from Portugal and Spain all the way to France and through the Alps into Italy, I actually met up with channel subscribers, and they took me to the coolest little places which only locals would know. The best part about having an audience on social media is every city I go to, I know people there, or at least people know me there, and they're willing to take their time out to show me cool places. But regardless, even after Rome was invaded from the north completely by surprise by Hannibal Barca, the Roman Empire was quick to recover and quick to react. Rome marshaled its armies, thousands of men strong, tens of thousands of men strong, and they sent them against the great general Hannibal Barca. But you think that Hannibal Barca didn't really have reinforcements. He was in enemy territory. All he had was what he came with across the Alps. He couldn't really refit. He didn't have more equipment. He didn't have more food. He was on the back foot, kind of. But then again, he was Hannibal Barca, no ordinary man, like I said before. So when the Roman armies arrayed against him, at Lake Trasimene, they were pushed into the lake. At Trebia, they were annihilated. At Cannae, they were butchered. You understand that these are not normal defeats in the same sense that we understand it in modern battle and modern warfare. Entire armies were wiped out. 80,000 men lost in an afternoon at the Battle of Cannae when they got encircled and butchered by the Carthaginians. And what does Rome do? What does a sane nation do when nearly 1/3 of its male population gets wiped out in a day? They would capitulate. Any sane empire, any sane kingdom I should say, or actually republic, would have in fact capitulated and sued for peace, try to get the best terms of peace with Carthage, but not Rome. Rome would rather be razed to the ground rather than be subjugated or defeated in battle. That was the kind of Roman republic that existed in the day of Hannibal. Impossible to beat. Every time you beat it, it only becomes stronger. Its resolve hardens with every defeat. How do you defeat such a foe? And yet, that same Rome, about 600 to 800 years later, when the barbarians were at the gates, they couldn't resist, even though they had more riches than ever, even though they had better technology, more soldiers. They had everything on their side. They were not caught by surprise when the barbarians came to take their lands and take their women and destroy their city. But they couldn't do anything about it. They didn't have the resolve. They didn't have the training. They didn't have the backbone which they had during the time of Carthaginian invasion. That same Rome which despised tyranny above all, the same Rome that hated kings and dictators, would eventually become the home of the worst excesses, the worst emperors, madmen and incompetents, tyrants and emperors would rule over Rome and take it to the ground. Of course, we had some good emperors as well, but the same Rome which would never accept tyranny became one of the biggest tyrannies on the planet and across history. So understand this, during the time of Hannibal, they hated the idea of a tyrant so much that they didn't want to put all the power into one man's hand. So even the Roman army would not be controlled by one man. They would actually change the general. They would have actually two generals for the army, and they would switch them out every other day so that one man doesn't accumulate too much power. How crazy is that? They hated tyranny that much that they would go to absurd lengths in order to prevent the centralization of power in one man's hand. And in fact, this quirk of the Roman army was taken advantage of by Hannibal Barca. He realized that the Romans would change their general every single day, and he used that as a part of his tactics to defeat them. But regardless, the point still stands that they hated tyranny. Rome hated tyranny more than any nation across history, and yet they fell to corruption and tyranny. This is a learning lesson to us all in every civilized part of the globe. This is one of the reasons why men think of the Roman Empire every single day. They must, that is their job. And what of external threats? The Rome that we know, the Rome that we read about, of course, destroyed external threats one after the other, conquering across the Rhine into Germania. Let me give you a list of reasons why men think of the Roman Empire every single day. First of all, the aesthetics. Of course, the architecture, art, and the color scheme of gold against crimson. The aesthetics of the Roman Empire were top-notch. The architecture of the city of Rome is breathtaking. And I should know, I was there a couple months ago. It's gorgeous. And you have to think, what we have now is just the ruins of a dead empire. The Pantheon, temple to the god Jupiter. Amazing structure. I mean, it still exudes so much power. That dome is so large, it's impossible almost to recreate. Its towers still stand reaching towards the sky. You can actually go there today and touch the very columns that held this wall up for hundreds of years. And to this day, the Roman Empire inspires so much art and culture and music. And I believe so long as civilization stands, Rome will never die away from our hearts. The second reason why men think of the Roman Empire every day was, of course, because of the values they stood for. They stood for honor and courage and virtue and legacy and family. And these are the virtues which are dying in this day. Of course we think about these things, about the things that we lost, the things that the Roman Empire stood for. But that being said, the Romans were not just a bunch of disciplinarians always doing their duty, etc. No, they knew how to have a good time. Read about what they did during the festival of Saturnalia. And most of all, we remember Rome because of the greatness that they achieved and of course the great fall that they had. They achieved all the glory that was known to man, but they also therefore fell the hardest. And it is up to us to learn what they did right so that we can emulate that, and we can also learn from what they did wrong that we may be warned. Indeed, let's get into that last point. What can we learn from the decline and fall of the Roman Empire? First of all, I want to talk about the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard were hand-picked elite soldiers from the legion whose only job was to defend the emperor against all ill. They were just, noble, and fiercely loyal to the emperor. And what they did, their job was to be a kind of a secret service. They were intelligent and brave men who would protect the empire against all threats, internal and external. And this they did do for quite a few decades until they too fell to corruption. And what happened there is the Praetorian Guard, the secret service of the Roman Empire, they realized that their power and money doesn't depend so much on the job they do, but rather how much control they have over the emperor. So if they had a genuinely competent and good emperor, he would rein their power in. And so their incentives were bad. Their incentives were in fact to install a puppet. Their incentives, if they wanted the maximum amount of freedom for themselves and the maximum amount of money for themselves, was to install a puppet emperor who they could control and of course kill, murder any emperor who was actually showing signs of competence. And they did this. It happened a lot. The best emperors, or at least the best emperors who could have arisen and restored the Roman Empire, were butchered by their own bodyguards for their own benefits because of their own greed and corruption. And they installed incompetents who they could control. And now this, of course, has certain disturbing parallels with what we see in the modern world. I won't go too much into this, but any man with a thinking mind can understand what it is I'm trying to say. Next, let's talk of demographic change. The Roman Empire was vast and had many, many different cultures in a time where different cultures actually were different. So they had many cultures, they had many different races and demographies and different kinds of people living inside the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was fairly okay with assimilation, but that's not the issue. The problem happened when the Roman Empire's armies were mostly made of non-Romans. The armies of Rome at one point were made mostly of barbarians. And then it's no surprise then, is it, when the armies marched upon Rome, the very armies sworn to protect the city actually were the ones who raised it and attacked it again and again. Many generals turned traitor. And why not? Their armies weren't even Roman. Every country must realize that there is a loyalty when the people of that country are tied to its land, and it's very important. You cannot just import a population and expect the same amount of loyalty to the initial country. That's just not how human tribalism works. And then finally, let's look at the debasement of currency. Debasement of currency. The word debasement actually means to change the nature of gold coins by adding base metals into them. This was done by many different kingdoms across time, of course, but the important one I remember is the one done by Diocletian. Diocletian is actually considered to be one of the restorers of the Roman Empire, but he'd made a huge mistake when he debased the currency of Rome. So what does Diocletian do? He makes more money. He doesn't have access to more gold because to collect more gold would increase taxation. He didn't want to increase taxation because doing so would actually inspire revolt. So what does he do? He takes the coins that he already has and adds cheaper metals, base metals, into them to increase his monetary supply. Understand these terms, monetary supply. And then essentially this is a policy of inflation. He uses inflation to steal away the savings of his citizens. That's what inflation is. Inflation is a tax. Inflation is nothing more than taxation. The only thing is it's not overt. That's what inflation is. And now you must really consider what it means when the biggest PhD macroeconomists who run the Federal Reserve insist that inflation is actually good for you and that it is good for the economy and it is actually why we have prosperity. No, they lie to you to your face. Look upon what happened to the Roman Empire when inflationary policies were adopted. Now you could actually excuse the Romans. They didn't understand economics to the level that we do. They didn't have the data that we do today. So you could excuse the Romans for having an inflationary policy, but no such excuse can be made for those who run the Federal Reserve. Now the question becomes, who runs the Federal Reserve and what their true aims are? And that's beyond the scope of this video, that's for sure. Now let's look at why it is that it is men who think of the Roman Empire every single day and not women. Women are completely bamboozled by the fact that we think of this all the time, at least once a week. Well, to put it simply, that's the job. That's the job. It's not women's job to think of the Roman Empire because they are not in charge of defending the nation against tyranny from within or external threats, barbarians at the gate. We must think of these things so that women do not have to think about these things. And of course, the Roman Empire is connected to everything that we see on a daily basis. This is not to say that women don't have an important role to perform in society. Of course they do, equally important as that of men. But it's just that the roles are different and the responsibilities are different. And of course, the biology is different. We think about different things. Men gravitate to think about stuff, things, concepts, ideas. Women tend to think more about people, relationships. That's fine. That's not a bad thing. Neither is better than the other. They are different purposes for the functioning of a healthy society. Indeed, it is up to men to think about the preservation of tradition. Tradition is, of course, not the worship of the ashes, but the preservation of flame. You see, all power tends to tyranny, and the Romans were the best example of this. The people who hated tyranny the most even became tyrannized. But of course, this is different in the modern age. You see, we have technologies which the Romans never had. So when our civilization, it's not a if, it's a when, our civilization goes towards a more tyrannical direction, the technologies that the governments will possess exceed anything that the Romans ever had. Think about this. The Roman Empire, Diocletian, even he couldn't truly change the currency that much because it was physical, gold or bronze, whatever coins that he tried to make, right? What happens when the government enforces a central banking cryptocurrency? Nothing good, that much I assure you. Indeed, it is the role of men to look at these things, see the mistakes of the past and make sure that we don't repeat them. That's the job, that's the nature of it all. It's up to you to armor your body against the xenotoxins and the xenoestrogens inflicted upon us by the corporations with the blessing of the government. It is up to you to train your mind against the endless psychological operations inflicted upon you by the powers that be. It is up to you to gather around yourself men like yourself who have a similar mindset and thinking. And it is up to you to contemplate the cycle of civilizations and where in that structure we lie. But finally, a word of hope. You see, Rome wasn't built in a day, but nor was Rome burned in a day. Many times when the empire came close to collapse, a man arose to change the fate of the Roman Empire. Think about the Restitutor Orbis, the restorer of the world, Aurelius. The Roman Emperor Aurelius changed the path of the Roman Empire from one of decline to one of great fame and power again. In just 4 years he managed this, and he would have restored Rome to its former glory had he not been assassinated by his own bodyguard. What about the Emperor Stilicho? What about Diocletian? These men made massive strides in reversing the decadence of their civilization. And what about Justinian? Justinian was born in a time when the Western Roman Empire completely collapsed, and yet he sent his best general, Belisarius, to take back, and he almost succeeded. He almost united the great empire once again, almost, just a hair's width away from complete restoration. The greatest Romans were not the ones who were born in the heyday of Rome, but rather the ones who were born in darkness and brought forth the light. Comment down below, Roma Invicta, and give me the latest thought about the Roman Empire that you've had. There's no question as to why men think of the Roman Empire every day. That much is obvious. The real question is, what the hell do women think about all the time?